Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to have you with us tonight. I'm Pastor Dwight Dunning, and I've got Dr. Larry Watts with us tonight, and we're going to be talking about COVID and how it affects us and some of the things that we have questions about. There's a lot of information out there on COVID and a lot of disinformation, and we'd just like to wade through some of these questions, and hopefully after tonight you'll feel a little bit better, more comfortable with where we are and what are the next steps that you need to take, what kind of precautions you need to take. But above it all, just we're here to glorify God, and so we're going to ask God to bless what we share now, that it'll be helpful, that it'll be strengthening, that it'll be life-giving to everyone that's watching. So pray with us. Lord Jesus, we thank you tonight for the joy of being able to share with the family of God. And during a time of great trial for many families, fear for some people, we just want to help people to see things clearly. You said the truth would set us free, and so we pray that you'll help us to understand the truth and stand on the truth. And maybe tonight we can help people see a little clearer what is the truth, so that we can live more at peace in our world, and we can live wiser in our world and know how we ought to act, what we ought to do. So be with us, God, and direct this conversation that will address the needs of those that are watching, and that after it's over, that we can say that God is glorified, because you are on the throne. You're in control of it all, and so we're trusting you tonight for you to rule and reign, even in this time we spend together. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. And so we do have Dr. Larry Watts, my good friend, and my medical doctor, as well as a church member. And we've had a lot of conversations about COVID the last few months or the last couple of years. And so I've asked you to come and help me help people. There's so much disinformation, in our world, people believing things that aren't true, and aren't believing things that are true. What do we need to do? How many patients have you seen that would you guess that have had COVID over the last, since it began?
Yeah, personally.
Yeah. Just you personally, just having
we're
a
probably
treatment.
somewhere close to 350.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range. So, the clinic, of course, we're in the thousands. And some days, it can be 20 a day and so forth, and especially during our peak. And we're starting to peak out again. And so when I've been on call on weekends, we have Dr. Pawnier's on call this weekend. I'll have to see how he did.
But for this to be a small town, though, you've seen a lot of people with COVID with all different levels of symptoms.
Oh, it is, to extremes. And most of the time I see the extremes, usually the older age groups generally. Yeah. And of course now we're seeing a lot of younger people, which we didn't see before.
Yeah.
And, so that's, the demographics have shifted a little bit. Mm-hmm. We think that's because of probably the vaccine has been the biggest impact. Like the nursing home, I was rounding in January, just one of our nursing homes had 27 cases in there just itself for that time. Right. And 2 weeks later we had the vaccine, and the next time I rounded we had no cases. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe that was random luck.
So it kind of skewed the statistics to begin with the nursing home issues.
Terrible.
So we don't have as much of that issue in America today.
Fractions.
And so the statistics we're seeing now kind of go to a lower demographic or a younger demographic.
It is, which is, in a way is kind of sad. More sad in a way, we don't want to lose our grandmother or grandfather, but we have a term called life years. And so even though our death rate right now is well below what it was in January, which is in the 5,000 range, we lost way approaching 150,000 people in 1 month. But life year is when you take the age of somebody passing away to their potential age, like if they're a male, we would say 76, 77. So if it's 40-year-old, that'd be 37 life years lost. So right now we're actually losing more life years, even though our total deaths are not as high as they were. But our average age of death was 78, and that shifted down to a lower age group.
When someone 78 dies, it's tragic, obviously, but but we say, well, they've lived a good life.
That's kind of our usual.
But
comment.
when a child or a young person that's 18 or 28,
Oh, yes.
probably 38, that's more of a realistic death right now of someone.
Because it's going to impact younger children if they have families. It's it's a lifelong loneliness for the spouse or surviving spouse, and it's really it becomes a sadder scenario in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So we are seeing the age of people with severe COVID coming down to younger people.
The average age of hospitalization currently is actually 44 in our hospitals throughout the whole country, and just prior to where we're experiencing this new variant, the Delta variant, which came from India, it was 61, and so we're drifting downward on that.
So right now, the COVID that's out there, is it generally speaking the variant, the Delta variant?
Yes, that's at least 99% right now.
Okay,
so it came up in June, about the time they said it was okay to stop wearing your mask. They actually were referring to vaccinated people at that time, but basically everybody dropped their things. We already knew it was here, and we knew we were going to get it because we already had Europe and we had England, but for some reason the political viewpoint did not recognize the anticipation of that coming, and so we actually we saw a lot of churches and other large groups that just stopped social distancing, and it made a big impact. So you see almost a logarithmic increase that popped up right after that, because it was way more effective. In fact, the UK, at first they told us 60%. The UK just gave us their statistic. It was 226% increase in infectivity. So we're talking about herd immunity when something is more infectious, and they relate this one to chickenpox, for instance. So it's roughly, for every person that gets it, roughly 4.5 to 5 they'll spread it to right now.
Really?
So the more people that are less prone to catch it, when you look at vaccination or susceptibility by immune sources, the more you can slow it down. So that's why it's picking up right at this point. It's a good thing it didn't start out this way, where we had no vaccination, no previous people that were infected, because there is some protection when you've had COVID. It does appear to wane, and we've had people at 4 months out get it a second time. We've had people now documented they've gotten COVID a third time. So it does happen. We've had several age groups that we've demonstrated that in. So, in fact, just recently, we had a gentleman and his son both got COVID last fall. He's 71, his son's around 40. His son is actually in the hospital right now. His father just died last week. He got COVID the second time, and he did not live through it. And that was, but it wasn't Delta variant back at that time. So so it's a little different scenario. Yeah.
Wow. So tell me about. Let's talk just a minute about the vaccine, since you bring it up, because there's so much disinformation about vaccines right now, and some people are just scared to death to get it. Other people are scared to death not to get it.
Yeah,
and
it's such a dichotomy.
Yeah, it is. And
it's very frustrating. We never had this with smallpox and all polio, and those were all full live virus vaccines. I mean, we're talking about we didn't see this one is nothing live,
Yeah.
But it just
and that's one of the misinformation. Some people think that when you get the vaccine, you get sick or you have symptoms, and they assume that they're giving you COVID. Those symptoms are not COVID. Tell us what it is.
Yeah.
When I get the vaccination, and I got 2 of them.
And you're probably hating your doctor about that time, I'm sure.
My doctor was very insistent that I get them, and every one of them made me sick. But I'm glad I'm covered
I'm
now.
glad you did too.
Yeah.
Well, what happens is, and it's true with like the flu. When we have fever with the flu, it's not the flu virus that's causing the fever; it's your immune system attacking the flu virus. And when you get the body aches, it's your immune system responding and attacking that flu virus with it. So most of the symptoms are actually similar in the same way. You can get a high fever, 103, but I know you're not sick.
Yeah.
because there's nothing infectious in it.
Okay.
And so, but it also has a limited time. Most people, it can be mild on the second dose. It usually doesn't appear in the first dose in most cases, but it's mild to moderately severe, and it might go 1 day or 2 day or 3 day. It happens to seem to be worse in general because it's not universal. Not everybody gets sick with it, but it's generally a little bit tougher on the younger people more. If you talk to 80-year-olds, most of them said, I did fine. I didn't even have a sore arm,
Yeah.
And,
That's why it was so tough on me, because I'm so
they're
young.
so young. Yeah, it was your youth.
Yes, that was it. They both gave me a time, until I got through it for a few days. But
And then there is also the fact if you've had COVID before.
yeah. Now does that have something to
It
do
has a
with it?
big effect on
Okay.
that. So people very often get sick on their first dose more often if you've had COVID, especially recently. And so we're kind of getting a little bit of time to stage the recent versus distant, because we have some COVID cases that go back 1.5 years now, but that we started with. But no, actually it's like getting an immune response. In fact, they're studying that specifically. Does one vaccine dose get you up to the point of the double dose vaccine? And so that's being dealt with right now, because the Delta variant, by the way, just to let you know, a single dose of Pfizer, which we didn't have a lot of Moderna over in England, because the Moderna actually outperformed the Pfizer with a single dose here compared to the Pfizer single dose. The double dose, they were similar. Pfizer had a different cross-section of patients. Moderna probably had a little bit more comorbidities there, so there was like 8–9% difference. But over there, the range of effectiveness for a single dose, because England was trying a different method of dealing with this, and that was to spread the vaccine out to more people. They were hoping, and it was working with the previous one, but with Delta, it doesn't work very well. We were in the 30% to a high of 39% in the studies that were portrayed with if you only had a single dose versus you're 88% roughly on average for our messenger RNA vaccines.
Okay, let's get that clear. With the first dose, you got pretty much a 35% coverage.
Yeah, 30 to 39 are the different studies they did. So it was not really high. So it was the second dose that actually was by far the most protective. In fact, one study compared people that had COVID, that you actually were better protected with having had COVID in the last 6 months than you were with a single dose. Now, when you took both doses, you surpassed the protection that you had with a recent COVID infection. And so most of our data, it's easier to extrapolate Europe data because they've been through this whole thing here several months before we did. So we've got their data, and we're accumulating data. Ours isn't too much difference. It's slightly different.
So natural immunity, and I'm hearing this too, natural immunity, that means I've had it, so my body has built up a certain amount of immunity to it. What is the numbers on that? Can I just trust the fact that I've had COVID, I should have immunity to it?
Well, I guess, you've got arguments on both sides, because we have had a few people die, but the percentages are pretty small, and I could show you some of those graphs if you want to see those. I brought them because it's hard for people to see the statistics. But like the gentleman I just shared with you that thought he was protected because he had COVID in the fall, and he just died, it was a little over a week ago. And his son also had it, and he was a younger man, and he's in the ICU right now. So and so, so it's not 100% with that. Now, according to the UK and the European, one of the studies, there's numbers all over the board, because some of them started halfway into Delta, and it was hard to know whether you were studying the old variant or the Delta variant. But according to the recent one that I saw, it was 80% effective at preventing symptomatic COVID if you had recent COVID, versus 88% with the second shot of the vaccine. However, one interesting piece of data was, what are your chances of getting COVID a second time if you've had COVID a first time, was twice as likely as a person who was vaccinated for COVID without having had COVID before. So there was, and we'll probably see, who knows, discriminations between that study. looking at Israel on some things that they're doing now. They had about 700,000 people that we looked at we're looking at their data right now, particularly when it comes to this booster. In fact, what is the real data? Because they're actually doing the booster right now. And we've had people here, almost 1 million people have already gotten the booster. It wasn't supposed to start until September 20th.
Okay, so the booster, that's interesting too. So at first I was told, or I believed, that I had COVID, so I'm immune. And then I got the first Moderna shot, which then I'm supposed to be okay, but then I need the second shot. And now we're saying I need a booster on top of that?
Well, I don't think we have the data yet. So what this is all about, I hate to say this was a presidential error. When the president speaks something, it kind of, they tried to redirect it. So he kind of misspoke, and he said that everybody will get it, and everybody started right now. But the truth of the matter is, the studies were directed towards 3% of the population. That's older, high-risk people with immune deficiencies. Okay. Whether you're being treated for cancer, on immunotherapy, you have these immunoglobulin deficiencies and other things. So it was geared towards that. And what we did was we saw the antibody titers dropping down. In fact, one study showed it dropped down to 17% of what was the full antibody. Just remember, I think you probably heard me throw some numbers at you. It's a bunch of numbers, probably all blended in. But when we looked at Moderna, since that's the one that's predominant in our area, at 6 months out, that there was nearly 1,000 times the antibodies generated by the vaccine as there was for COVID itself at that point. So you can't take that, apples for apples, that you've got that many more times the amount of immunity, because we don't have that. There's different forms of immunity when we looked at natural immunity. And one of the things people talk about, which Moderna is looking at this, their research vaccine altering for the true booster, which would be something that's different. The booster we're talking about now would be the same vaccine. But anyway, they're really referring to that. So it was going to be 8 months after your vaccine, and it was going to be after September 20th, which meant those would be people that were initially vaccinated in December 20th to the 25th, in that range. But, So that was what it started. It kind of extrapolated it partly because of an accidental slip by one of our leaders, namely our president.
Okay.
So we don't have true data for that yet.
We don't have data. So what do we do?
Well, I do know that at 6 months we were pretty high, and and I think doing the right things. See, there's 4 phases of protection that we should be looking at. One is the prevention side of it. One is early treatment. One is late treatment, and the other one would be the vaccination. And our government has only looked at 2 of those, and almost very little emphasis on the other 2. So we have groups in other parts of the world that are doing that because they can't afford things that we were doing in the hospital, which many of them have failed. Like remdesivir is probably the most famous thing that you've heard about, because if you give that late, especially with the previous virus, we showed no evidence of saving 1 life even. So they extrapolated the data before they discontinued all of their studies, and World Health told everybody to stop using in other countries because it not only was expensive, but it didn't save lives. But they said it might reduce hospital stays in mild to moderate COVID. Well, guess what? Mild to moderate COVID, you may not be eligible to hospitalize. So how could you reduce hospital? But there is a stage of moderate that we do when you need oxygen, and that we consider hospitalizable to severe in that range. But for that group, there was no lives saved. And even our monoclonal antibody did not work. In fact, it was less than placebo. We only had 900 in that study. And so we're offering that to people if they get it early on. So if you're going to do an early treatment from anybody, because there's no proved treatment, earlier the better. First 5 days is, or 5 days. Yeah, 5 days is critical. Ideally, 3 days. But if you're still having the sniffles and some real minor symptoms, people aren't as motivated to do it at that point. But we don't know which one's going to have the immune system backfire on you and take, end up interfering with people like Eric that we brought tonight.
Yeah, we got Eric here with us. Would you like to just tell Eric's story a little bit? And I'm going to let him come up and talk
Oh,
to
sure,
me just a
sure,
minute or
that'd be
two, and he
fine,
can tell
yeah.
his story. So, Eric, he's a patient of yours?
Yes, he is. He's put up with, hasn't fired me yet. I don't know. We'll see.
May after tonight,
He
right?
might have to tonight.
Yeah.
No, Eric, I happened to be gone when he first got this thing. I was in Montana at the time, and his aunt, who used to be one of my nurses, was trying to get him there, and I wasn't there. But anyway, he showed up at the emergency room, and ultimately he had some difficulties fainting and ended up on oxygen. And he has COVID pneumonia, which we're actually treating some secondary things right at this point. He gave me permission to share this, so I don't usually spill out everybody's chart on the air, by the way.
Any of his patients get nervous now.
Yeah, don't get
They're
nervous.
Not gonna talk about you.
Yeah, it's all going to be on Facebook. No. Eric gave us permission. He came here just tonight, and we did find a clot. So he's experienced a few of the things, and that's one of the things that people fail to realize. It's not just death that we're dealing with. And it's not even just hospitalization. It's what we call the comorbidities following this thing.
Yeah.
So if you pay attention to the data, they're going to always look at how many cases we've had. They'll show you the death rate, and then they'll show you those that haven't fully recovered. And right now in our country, that's over 8 million people.
Wow.
And in fact, it may be an impact enough that it's going to affect our Social Security, because that's a lot of people suddenly to add to the existing plethora of disabled people. But might want to.
Yeah, let's get Eric over here and
I'm going
talk
to
to him.
pass this to you.
I haven't met Eric until tonight, and it's been a pleasure to meet him so far. And he has a couple of family members with him here helping him. It's taken him a minute to get over here because due to COVID, he has to have some constant help with his breathing. He's on oxygen. How much oxygen are you on, Eric?
4 liters.
4 liters. So any of y'all that know about liters of oxygen, that's a pretty high dose of extra oxygen. And so if you turn it down to 3 or something, what happens to you, man?
It slowly drains me.
Your life just starts going down.
You slowly lose.
Yeah.
The capacity to get that wind back.
Yeah. How old are you?
42.
You're 42, and this thing hit you really, really hard. I think our youth pastor, Pastor Dwayne's. Dwayne, are you 42? Somewhere in that area too, and it's scary. What it's used to, be real devastating. We thought to the older people, but we're seeing, people like you in the prime of your life, and things happen. So what do you do for a living?
I work at a drugstore.
You work at the drugstore, and so now you're not able to work at the drugstore.
I'm not able to work anymore.
Tell me a little bit about how you what happened, how you got COVID, and kind of the timeline.
I'm not really sure where I actually got it from, but when I got off work one day, I came home and I sat on the couch, took a nap, and when I woke up, I just still didn't feel right from the nap.
Yeah.
I was still just feeling a little off, and weakness when you walk, weakness in your joints, things like that. So, I went to the ER to get tested. So I went there and got tested, and it came back positive. So they sent me home with Tylenol and ibuprofen.
Tylenol and ibuprofen.
Tylenol, ibuprofen was to solve everything.
Yeah.
And
apparently it did.
It didn't. As I was laying in one bed night, I was trying to fight it off. Always got the fever, couldn't get rid of the fever. And I just started, it was just something that ached. And I said, okay, I got to leave here. I got to go back.
Yeah.
And they took me back to the hospital, went to the emergency room. And then I got out of the emergency room. They sent me to the ICU. I stayed there 14 days. 14 days. Some of them were bad, where you were fighting for air.
Oh, yeah.
Just to get it into your lungs, even though you got all the oxygen fighting to you and all that.
You weren't put on a ventilator, were you?
No.
Did they give you the full face mask?
They gave me the high flow.
The high flow.
So that's what I started out with in the emergency room is what they gave me. Because when I got there, I couldn't breathe. The EMTs had to pretty much tote me to the stretcher.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the capacity to actually walk to the stretcher. So, so I got there, and then I stayed in ICU. It was pretty painful for me because what it felt like is you take a knife, stick it in between your ribs,
Yeah.
and now cough, and now move that knife back and forward.
Ooh. Ooh.
Every time you cough, every time you try to take a breath, you can
Wow.
feel it
Yeah.
because you're not actually getting what you need.
Right.
And
And you have to breathe.
you
and
have
know
to
it's
breathe,
gonna hurt.
and you know it's going to hurt, but you still got to breathe all the
Oh
time.
my goodness.
So that's what it felt like to me as I had to fight through it. But yeah, it was a tough struggle on me and my family.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the things we don't think about too. Is I get sick, but when I get sick, other people suffer with
from
me.
it.
Yeah, it doesn't mean I might give it to them, but there's other things, them having to wait on me and
Worry about me.
worry about you.
Not come see, can't be able to come see you in the hospital. Things like that.
Yeah. Did you get your vaccination?
I did not get a vaccination.
And
Regret.
Was there a reason you regret not doing it? Is there a reason for that though? I mean, did you were you going to do it or just didn't
I just didn't think it was because I'd been around the COVID.
Yeah.
People came in the store all the time.
Oh,
we were interacting with them. We were washing our hands. We were keeping our distance.
Yeah.
Using hand sanitizer, not to try to keep it off of us, but I was around it for so long before it actually got hold of me.
Sure. You could kind of think, well, if I would get it, I would have already got it.
Yeah, I would have already showed up somewhere that you would have had it.
Yeah. And now what's your prognosis? Do you know where you go from here?
Well, I still have, like Dr. Watts was saying, you still have side effects from what COVID does to you. So like my pneumonia is still there. So we still have to figure out how to fight that off. So that'd probably help with my oxygen, liters of oxygen that I use if I get rid of pneumonia. I lost 30 pounds in the hospital for staying in bed for 14 days.
Yeah.
So the legs were weak. You weren't doing much moving around. So it's still a struggle to fight back. So even when I came home, walking for 5 minutes was a struggle.
Yeah.
Just walking down the hallway back and forth
Yeah.
for 5 minutes was just a struggle to keep you enough air in you to say that you don't exhaust and pass out. So you have to sit down, take breaks, things like that. You just don't. And even the few days that I had before I actually got the blood clot in my leg, you're not recovering as fast as your mind thinks. We're young. We think we can. We think we can fight it off.
Yeah.
And run up and down the road again.
Right.
But your body and your legs being weak and your lungs being weak, you just can't make it happen. It's going to be a struggle to continue to work on it to try to fight it off.
Yeah.
But that's what I concern is it's the after effects of COVID. You may get over it, and those other things are going to be more difficult to overcome in a longer time and a longer span. For people to do.
Yeah. And so, what would you say to our audience now concerning vaccinations or
if you can get it, I would go get it. They're giving it away, so I would strongly recommend to do it. So even Dr. Watts has recommended me to do it after I get well enough to actually get through to actually get fully vaccinated.
Well, Eric, I'm real sorry that you've gone through what you're going through. 14 days in ICU, 16 or more days at the hospital through it all, and you don't know if it's going to be weeks or months or years or the rest of your life that you're going to have assistance. We certainly hope not, but you're a survivor so far, and I believe you're going to be okay. Dr. Watts, is there something that you wanted him to share that maybe we haven't? Or the one thing I think, the reason you wanted him to be here for this interview was you're 42 years old. That is the average age of that's the group that's getting it now.
That's average age of hospitalization.
Hospitalization. So there are people younger than 42 that are being hospitalized for this. There's people older. The average age is 42. That's a young population for a disease like this. We were, for the longest time it was 62 or 72 or whatever, nursing home patients.
Well, it was. Yeah, the average age of death was 78.2, and we've got I just left the hospital not long before I came here. We have a 28-year-old in the hospital right now also, and we had 2 of them under 30 one time, and one was on a vent, which is a high risk.
Yeah.
But so when we look at somebody young that has their whole life, because recovering, and I don't want the negativity to hit Eric right at this point, but when you're on oxygen, it's like you've been a smoker for 50 years and you don't have the reserve to get older, because when you get 60, you lose 1% of your lung function. So
you lose that anyhow.
You lose that normally.
Yeah, okay.
And so, my hope and prayer, and I think all his family is praying, that we're going to be able to beat this thing and come back. You've got to stop the immune system from destroying your organs. And that's basically, you don't die really from the COVID, you die from your immune system attacking where that virus is replicated. And this thing replicates faster than any of our other viruses. That's why it's more easy to get infected with it. It spreads much faster. So we call that herd immunity when we keep on thinking we're going to get there. But, it's somewhere close to 80% now, because the herd immunity is affected by vaccinated people. It's affected by people that have had COVID. But the problem now we're having is you can get COVID a second and even a third time. And so we're worried that it's going to go from pandemic to endemic. I wish we could say everybody in the world would take a vaccine and we could end it.
Yeah.
But there's not enough willpower to do that. We're just fighting over everything, and then we got people making money off of telling wrong information. There's some real concerns that we've had about vaccine, but we're talking about the myocarditis issue that Pfizer had their first death. I'm not going to hide that, but they've given almost 1 billion doses of vaccine too. But and I don't know our risk factors, but we can actually prevent that. Part of the treatment that we give in our outpatient protocol actually prevents it. It's steroids. That's another one that treats that. And it's not like the myocarditis you die from COVID, which is way higher risk.
Yeah.
It's like the clotting risk. Nobody wanted to take the vaccine from the UK's favorite one, which is AstraZeneca. 1 out of 86,000 got clotting. Well, it's more than 1 out of 3 in our ICU get clotting, so we put everybody in high-dose blood thinners. And Eric was on those and comes home, and then I find a clot anyway. So and I know they were treating them. It's one thing we've improved with. We found out this clotting issue is big between strokes, sinuses in your brain, and pulmonary embolism, DVT, intra-organ clotting. And of course, your family has been hit big time with this, and all around you know more than anybody about that firsthand.
Well, So, I have people come to me and say, well, people get the vaccine and die. What do you say when someone tells you you need to get the vaccine? Well, but a lot of people die when they get the vaccine.
Well, one, I would like them to look at real data. Because that is true. Now, up until the Delta variant, we had almost nobody hospitalized that I'm aware of at all until the Delta variant came. So then we had our first 2 hospitalized. They're all high-risk vaccinated people. But why don't we look at...
Is that where it's at? Yeah, the high-risk people are the ones that are dying. It's not from the vaccine or maybe even the variant itself, but pre-existing
conditions. So if you look at the average age of death right now, it's actually dropped down in numbers. Now, if you look at the average vaccinated death, that's higher than. So we're talking about hospitalization of 40-year-olds. Like, for instance, some of our recent deaths in our county, 38, 42, 47, 4 in the 50s. We had almost 4 in the 60s, and then we had a couple in the 70s. But, most of our more recent ones with Delta have been, the average age has been different, because our nursing home, we're not losing our nursing home patients. We're trying to protect them. It's not that they wouldn't be susceptible, but most of the cases came from healthcare workers. So, bringing it to them. And so we were very restrictive about family visitation. But why don't we pick a couple of graphs here. Maybe this might help a few on there. Let me show the risk graph. Let's do this in order. Number 3. Let's do number 3 to start with. So we just brought a few. We weren't sure what questions people were going to ask, but these are kind of important things for people to understand, I think. Okay. So can everybody see that right now? Is that up there? So if everybody looks on there, on the age relationship, and you go all the way to the bottom where it says death, you can see the 0 to 4 is less than 1-fold. The reference group on this graph is people 18 to 29. Now, in our county, we have lost people younger than 29. So it's not that they don't die, they do die. And we've actually, in our state, we've had a 17-year-old recently, a 16-year-old a few weeks prior to that. So they do, but look at what 85-year-olds, 600 times. So when I hear an 80-year-old refusing a vaccine, I think, oh my goodness, where are we getting our information from? We're talking about the death rate of 80. I'll just give you a death rate ranges. Age 80, you got 9% chance of death to about 24.9 on our previous statistics. Now, according to some data, they claim that this Delta variant is up to 4 times more likely to cause severe illness. Thank God somehow these elderly have been protected. If it wasn't the vaccine, maybe it's everybody just praying hard, but I think that God invented the vaccine, because guess what? The vaccine is nothing other than a piece of the tip of the virus. The vaccine is everything that God designed in your body, and that's the antibody. We are not smart enough as human beings. As smart as man wants to think he is, we barely can understand the function of antibody memory, and the effect on T and B cell immunity. It's a complex thing. There's actually 4 different levels of immunity that our system can trigger to protect us. Otherwise, the human race wouldn't exist. And you think about, all we were throwing was live viruses at people. All of our first vaccines were live viruses. We just attenuated, we reduced the severity, their capability of infecting us, we just made them recognizable enough to our immune system that.
I remember the smallpox and the sore it left on me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a live virus.
That was, And so
what about polio?
Polio was live virus. But they were what we call attenuated. Now, Jonas Salk actually, back at that time, the first people that tried it?
I think he did it himself.
He did, and his family.
And his family.
I don't know if his wife had her insurance paid up, but they were the first people.
He bought insurance for you, did that?
So one is to look at this thing. Now, you look at the 40 to 49. Now, Eric is in the early 40s, so he was essentially tenfold more than the 18 to 29, and even the 30-year-olds fourfold. But our average age of hospitalization now is right here, so we shifted from here down to here. So this is a whole new ball game we're looking at. Now, one of the other ones that we might look at that might help them we're just talking about their risk with COVID in general, but this one, let's look at the vaccine on number 2. And you got number 2 up? Okay. If everybody can focus on these little open boxes on your left, if you look to your left, there's a solid bar and then there's an open bar. The open bar, besides the taller solid bar, I must be getting hungry. Solid bar is actually the vaccinated people. The tall one that's dark or solid, that is the unvaccinated people.
Okay. So this does that. Yeah, it's true. Vaccinated people do get COVID.
They do get COVID.
But unvaccinated people get it on a much higher level.
Much higher scale. So look at the relative span between that little box and the 80-year-olds to the top box. And then if you go to that printed outline right beside it, go to an 80-year-old where it says no vaccine, 28,104 people followed in that study. And of those of the vaccinated, this was the risk ratio of those that got COVID that had the vaccine and those that got COVID that did not have the vaccine. It was 24.29 times higher incidence of catching COVID at that age group. Now, if you look at going down, let's go back to Eric's age group. There was no vaccine. And if you look at 40 to 49, it says 19,886 people were in that study that non-vaccinated. There's 2,494 in the vaccinated group that got COVID. And so your risk ratio compared to the non-vaccinated was 1/8 of what it was with vaccine. So you look all the way up even into the age 10 to 19. Now, there's a discussion on the younger age groups that I'd have to do when you look at risk stratification. But while you look at these ages 30 on down, there's not even a question about risk.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're playing, going to Las Vegas and playing the slots, you better be. I mean, it's like wishing that you're going to be struck by lightning or not struck by lightning. But when you look at if you want a safe bet, I know where my money would be put. It wouldn't be put on the wrong side. There is one other one that I'll show you that kind of is showing our trends with this vaccine. That'd be graph number 1 that I brought here. And it shows monthly hospitalization rate ratios by age groups. So I'm going to take a look at 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so if you go over 4 boxes from the small boxes, which would be the youngest boxes, that was essentially Eric's age group that we're following, and you follow it through January, February, March, April, and you see all the way in August that those boxes for that age group are all going up. As a result, this is hospitalization. That's why now our average age in the hospital is 44. That's across the whole country. So that's not just the Sampson County average.
Right.
And you see another thing that's interesting is you look at your 70 to 79 and the 80 plus year olds and look at what it did. It's going down. Why did it go down? Well, the biggest reason, the only thing we have an explanation for, is because of vaccination.
Yeah.
And so now we're at a point where at about 88% vaccinated in the group above 65, and so that's where some of those data.
So we're just not seeing the older people dying simply because of vaccination.
Even though there is an occasional person.
Oh, of course.
But generally there are more complex comorbidities in that vaccinated person. That's why they're talking about the 3% of our population. It wasn't everybody. That was a mistake by one of our leaders. And about the booster, because we don't have the data, but we do have some data that group, their protection dropped down to 17%. And so we know that additional boost, if somebody's been on prednisone, if somebody's a cancer patient, chemotherapy, those kinds of things. So and especially 75 and above, some of the older population. So we got pretty good data on that is helpful. Remember, that is not the booster that's being researched. It is the same exact vaccine. Right now, it's only Pfizer and Moderna that we're talking about in that regard. So I think they have to talk to their doctor about whether it's advisable. 1 million people have already gotten the booster, even though originally it was sent to us, it was going to start September 20th. But because if you want to ask for a vaccine, because it's been so hard to twist people's arms, because we got the social media making money off of crazy stuff, and I can go through the list if you want them, but
we probably don't have time for that.
We don't have time. There's too much.
too much craziness out there. But there are. Well, here's something that I get asked quite often, or I don't get asked. I get told that I don't trust the vaccine because they create it so quickly. What is it, CDC? Who is it that approves it? Not CDC. The
FDA.
FDA. The FDA approved it so quickly after the virus, And typically it takes 20 years or more of testing before you can trust a virus. So we don't know what kind of crazy things this is going to do to us.
Well, you might want to ask Jonas Salk because he tested it right away.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, if we're looking at messenger RNA, and messenger RNA is the newest one. Why was the messenger RNA the first one on the block to make it? Well, it wasn't because they just made them, because we already had vaccines to SARS-CoV-1 that was being researched on, and there wasn't a big variable between it. The other thing is we had...
Well, that's interesting what you just said, though. Is that what you're saying is the vaccine we have now, it isn't like we created it from ground up. It was already...
We already had research base.
The research base was already there.
Almost 30 years of research with messenger RNA.
30 years.
30 years.
Of the active ingredient, or the
the messenger RNA.
The messenger RNA.
So here's the kicker. So if you want to, don't trust me, research it yourself if you can. I mean, I'll help you with the details because I've spent my life studying details.
Yeah, you have.
But if we look at this vaccine, what was the key thing why it isn't what was the number one way we do vaccines before? Because guess what? Your recombinant DNA, which would be like shingles,
Okay.
and others, of course, Johnson & Johnson used recombinant DNA, AstraZeneca used recombinant DNA. All of those, their end goal is to stimulate messenger RNA. So the only reason they didn't do it is because they couldn't store it to have a commercial vaccine. So the problem with messenger RNA is it's produced in the body and it goes away very quickly. It does its job and it's gone. In fact, this vaccine that we have, and there's little differences, and that's a nuance, probably not for this crowd, but if somebody is interested in science will go. But at 2 to 4 hours, the vaccine is pretty much gone at that point. And the whole purpose of the vaccine is to manufacture these tiny little proteins. That's the little tips on the virus, and we call them the spike proteins.
Okay.
And most of them picked that because they knew that was most likely to be the most successful one right away if we were going to prevent death, because we weren't very successful with coronavirus and other cold vaccines that were attempted by other people using traditional vaccines.
Right.
They did not work hardly at all. In fact, there is other countries that have a live virus COVID vaccine, and you can tell it's not being published because it didn't work very well.
Yeah.
So as a result, there's something different with it. So the recombinant DNA stimulates your body to produce messenger RNA. It goes down that DNA, sees that message through ribosomal replication, which is, maybe I shouldn't mention that term, but anyway, that's a method of reproduction of these proteins. And then you produce these little spike proteins. And then they usually hang around the outside of the cell wall. You want them to take place in your arm because now we're waiting for God's creation, which is the smart stuff. Remember, we're the dumb stuff. All we can do is barely reproduce little pieces of what God created already.
Yeah.
And we put it in your body. And then the antibodies come. We have this phagocytosis and other process that cleans up the bacteria.
This is all God's created
It's
work,
all God's creation. We think we're smart. We've never invented nothing that was really super smart. I mean, it's something that God already created.
We're just giving God the opportunity to bring healing in our body.
It is. So his immune system basically is recognizing this thing, so it's getting an early course without being infected. And so our immune system is attacking this protein. And all of our data shows it doesn't live in your body forever. It can't replicate. It is not DNA. It is not RNA. It doesn't take over your body. I mean, it's just buku crazy stuff on there.
All right, so since y'all are on the vaccine and we're on that, that has been like the #1 question.
Sure.
Morgan can
Sure.
over here too. I'm going to try to wrap some of these up into one single question, but I have several questions to ask about the vaccine. One, let me go to where the very beginning with this. I guess the #1 question with that is, what's the purpose of getting the shot if it doesn't really prevent you from getting it? Like, I guess when we hear vaccine, like I don't get polio when I get the polio vaccine, but people are getting COVID after getting the COVID vaccine. Do people in general, what is the purpose of it if people are still getting it? I guess what's the answer to that?
Well, one, we have some details on that, and you may not want that, but the risk of getting COVID is still significantly reduced. We do have data that there was a group recently. It was at one town. It was highly vaccinated group. They had a meeting of about 900. 400 of them got COVID from somebody in their community that apparently had COVID. And 7 were hospitalized out of a very high elderly group. So we do know that it can spread. But the thing is, if you look at the data that I just showed you, the risk is significantly reduced in what happens when you get it. So when your risk of hospitalization is hugely reduced, and your risk of death is even more reduced. So we're talking about 95+% reduction in the risk of death, and your risk of hospitalization, if I use the European model, is 10 to 12%. But if you can go through hospital without dying, without having severe COVID, without having what Eric's going through right now, that is our goal, is cutting comorbidities, cutting death, cutting hospitalization. So if you can reduce your rate to 10% of that, and I think that's probably a good trade. It was a good trade in my way of looking at it.
Pretty good odds change.
You've sort of answered this, and you've said it over and over. I'm going to ask it anyways. The whole idea of, okay, well, right now they started off with, oh, you only got to get 2 shots, and now there's boosters. Is this going to be a continuing trend that we're going to have to get boosters over and over?
Well, the truth of the matter is, if everybody got the vaccine up front, it could be like smallpox, we could eliminate it, but it's not happening. Too much freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and people make money off social media both ways, good or bad. Mm-hmm. And of course, the one thing I might add to you is that social media was addressed in March and April by our Congress. I don't know if you remember that. There was a congressional hearing about false information. So please know where your sources for. If you're thinking about infertility as being one of these things, just erase that from your mind. The guy that said that wasn't even a doctor, and we get thousands of inquiries all over the country. It's millions of kids think that they're going to be infertile by getting the vaccine. I mean, he didn't know what he was referring to. He made a mistake. He made a guess that something might happen. It wasn't even the same protein on the placenta as the vaccine. He made a statement it was the same, and it wasn't the same. And it was debunked the minute it left his mouth. But yet he generated income off that thing. And so they never pulled it back. Nobody retracted, because then social media makes money off it. So, but anyway, going back to your question, how can I refine that a little bit?
I guess is this going to be like a continual thing where it's like, okay, I've got a booster this year, a booster next year? Like, is it going to be a continual kind of process?
Okay. Somebody asked me to make sure I included that, so
sorry about
that.
That'll be fine, sure.
But we have what's called pandemic when we're dealing with an acute. What I'm worried about is it could become endemic, because we mess around with this thing.
Now, remind us what the difference between pandemic and endemic.
Flu and cold season would be like endemic. We expect a normal cycle of this, and I'm kind of afraid. Well, here, I'm going to use flu as a statement on this, because this is still somewhat unknown. But flu right now in the wild has 131 subtypes. And everybody's heard H1N1, right? Well, it goes H1 to H18, N1 to N11. We have an A and B flu that we're mostly worried about. So if the doctor checks you for flu, it's going to be labeled an A or B type flu. There is a C and a D. The D is primarily animal, crosses into human. We might label A or B within that. Then there's a C, which is more like a common cold, in that it doesn't seem to have consequences, causing problems like what Eric has, for instance. And so we started out with the flu pandemic of 1918, and there was over 100 million people died, and we have the potential of having something like that again. This had, like, if we had SARS-CoV-1 and it spread like Delta, we would have had the potential of losing at least that many people.
Wow.
Again. So over the time, when they start mutating out, the only problem is now we got more subtypes of this thing, not variants. There's variants that are in between these variations that we have, like H1N1. Those aren't variants. Those are actually subtypes. So we haven't gotten to that point yet. We're still in the variant stage, which is minute, small molecular changes each time we let another trillion replications. Each body, you're getting trillions of infections on. So the risk of this thing is, and why you might need changing of your vaccine, is the same way that we have 4 different vaccines every year for flu because there's a different predominant strain that we predict is going to be circulating the next flu season. And we go by the other side of the equator of what's happening over there, and we see what are the most dominant strains. Right now, our success rate of picking 4 that cover them is 85%, meaning 15% of the time we're going to miss the one flu that won't have any vaccine coverage. And so we have about 60,000 deaths each year from flu and about 600,000 worldwide. So that would be the scenario that could happen. If we had worldwide vaccine effort like what we saw with smallpox, we could essentially eradicate it. Smallpox only exists in the laboratory for somebody else to use it as a weapon against us, or we use it to produce a vaccine to somebody that makes a weapon out of it. So all of our major countries actually have that. But otherwise it's eradicated. It doesn't exist except in the lab unless somebody lets it leak out. And so, we've had a number of previous vaccines that way. So that would be the reason for the vaccine is the virus keeps on changing. The more people that are on vaccine, the more people that get it, the more variants that occur and the more mutations occur, and more likelihood we'll have something that's going to spread faster, could be more lethal. We hope it's going to go the other way. Traditionally, the flu has got a little bit less lethal than it was in 1918. Of course, we have better ways to treat, more facilities in there. So I don't know if that would...
That answers what we're going. We have another person that said, again, I'm just doing the vaccination questions right now since y'all were on that. They said, what about our own immunity system, adding zinc, vitamins, and stuff like that? Their main concern is the unknown effects of this vaccine specifically. I know you were talking about the RNA stuff already a little bit. Mm-hmm. I know for me personally, that was one of the things that I was hesitant about because this is, when I say new, it's one of the first ones that has been...
Oh, it's new that you knew about.
Yeah, well, it's the first one that's globalized as a vaccine, and I know they've been working on it per se, but it's not... Yeah. It was something new that they had started using. What are some concerns? I mean, even for a doctor, what are some concerns, or longer-term concerns about this kind of vaccine?
Yeah.
Are there any?
There's not many. If you look at all vaccines that we've ever produced, almost all of the side effects, I mean, we're not talking about 99.99%, happen in the first 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. So the biggest concerns is autoimmune. Remember, this protein is inert. It's not going to do much of anything. Remember, it can't replicate. Once the vaccine is done, the protein stopped forming. So if I inject, here's the big concern. If I inject this into Pastor's arm, but I get into a vein, so now I've created a possibility of something. Fortunately, it's pretty low, but it's possible if that vaccine, all of it goes into that vein, guess where do veins go? They go back to your heart and lungs, right? So that one is myocarditis. That is actually why Moderna hasn't gotten full FDA approval right now. It's interesting though, Pfizer has had their first death with this. Now they've given lots of doses. We're approaching 1 billion doses with these the
billion.
Yeah, wow. Pfizer. And so remember, we've given 440 million shots in our country alone. So, and they're producing all over the world for these. So they've had their first case that they died of myocarditis. Now, the incidence is 8 per million, according to the last Pfizer study I saw, 8 per million. So people don't die every time from myocarditis. Now, they die way more frequently from myocarditis than these other. Remember, COVID is an autoimmune disorder. You don't die from that. It triggers your immune system to hammer kidneys, liver, lungs, heart, and your brain. We know that they're shrinking, the COVID fog and all of these long-term effects. We have coming up with terms to fit all of the disease scenarios that happen out of this. So typically, if a doctor recognizes it and the patient goes in for help, it's actually pretty easy to treat because guess what? It's only a confined number of these proteins that are created. They're not doing anything. It's your immune system attacking you. So that would be one of the concerns. Now, you've had other ones which are autoimmune disorders. One is called Guillain-Barré, which happens with other vaccines. In fact, if you had a vaccine, theoretically your nurse is supposed to ask you that or your doctor tell you about it. And that can end up causing paralysis from the waist down. Okay, thankfully those are pretty rare events too. And that happens with flu. We've had some this year. If the doctor recognizes it and the patient goes early enough, we can freeze these, get rid of them, and use strong steroids and suppress your immune system. And you freeze them out. You can actually filter them out just like dialysis. If you wait too long to go to the doctor and your doctor or nurse practitioner or whoever doesn't figure this out, because I've actually, it's fairly simple, but if you have to see one to do one and you don't remember how it was, because you may not see one in your whole career. So that's the whole thing. And you spend your time working up a stroke, and I'm gonna order MRI, and then I'm gonna consult neurology. It's too late. You've just wasted 2 to 3 weeks, and it's too late. So whatever your body recovers from is what you're gonna get out. So most of the time, it's not long term. It's not fully, but those autoimmune disorders, which are actually in all vaccines, are the big thing. Just remember that when they're going in your body, it's not them causing it. It's your immune system saying, I've got a stranger on board, I'm going to attack it with all that I've got. Unfortunately, this thing is the virus attaching to something on your body. So unfortunately, it's attacking your body parts because the virus you've allowed it to replicate. That's why sitting at home for a long time, you're going to get full replication and trillions of copies of this thing on all your organ systems.
Wow.
And so where it's attached is where your immune system is going to attack. So remember, don't blame God for this, okay? Because we do know that it's more likely to happen as we get older, but partly because we've been exposed to more disease processes over the course of our lifetime. And we could store up these chemicals called cytokines. Interleukins is a form of cytokine, and when they attack, they were designed to attack our bacteria and viruses and bad things in our body. But once you spread it through your whole body, it's like attacking your whole body. And so that's probably the big concern. So big thing one would be educating providers so they know how to deal with things early, because otherwise that death didn't need to happen. It's easy to treat, but the patient's got to show up first, and the person's got to respond. So most of the time it doesn't happen, but that was Pfizer's first documented death that just happened this last week.
Wow.
So like I said, most of them were vaccine questions. I have another one. For a younger female who wants to have children someday, is there any truth that, I guess, primary to COVID vaccine can cause issues with pregnancies or cause unborn children to have birth defects? I'll be honest, that's a concern I have. I have a little girl that she's the age I can get her picked now, and I'm a little afraid. What does that long term look like?
Okay, I may have a less than Christian response, but I'm going to try to be generous with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was a PhD, and nothing against PhDs, and pastor's PhD too, but he was not a medical doctor, made a statement he thought could cause fertility issues, and he made a big boo-boo, and it was, well, let's put it this way. One of the things that I casually sometimes, what you lack in intelligence, you totally compensate for in stupidity.
Yeah.
Okay, have you ever heard me say, well, sometimes I have to say that to myself.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's where all of this got started from.
Uh-huh.
And it had never even been studied. And all of a sudden, everybody's watching Facebook and YouTube. And this guy made some money off of this thing. Mm-hmm. Everybody's hitting on this thing, millions of hits. And we're getting that question today. But if you go look in the FDA and CDC site and you Google that, it's like we're almost sick and tired of answering that one because it was disproven the minute it left his mouth. It said, these vaccines nor any other vaccine has ever been known to be associated with infertility. So, and also they've been studied safe in pregnancy. COVID in pregnancy is a risk factor. Now, I told my daughter I would take it. She said, I'm not going to take it because she just had a baby a little while ago. But I told her, I know what's in the vaccine. I know that protein. And I said, I'll bet you that it's going to be proven safe. So we had a number of female doctors that took it that were confident about their knowledge about this thing. And so we had the full clearance from all of those that studied. Nobody had problems with the baby. Nobody had problems with the mother, but it actually cut their risk factors down. Now, the other thing that we actually got to study in the process, thankfully to the doctors studying themselves, female doctors, that wasn't me. That would be really the Immaculate Conception. but they actually inferred immunity to the baby. that was born. So we've actually
Oh,
now
really?
studied some of that part of it. So we saw antibodies that pass through, which happens, through. So there are some things that we probably don't understand 100%, but when we look at this thing, this vaccine is going to be used for cancer, already has been. One of your previous presidents already been treated with it, a vaccine to cancer. So it's so simple to make. You can make this vaccine literally in a weekend once you know your target. So it's way easier than the pre-existing vaccines we had. And so it's kind of a miraculous thing from a lot of perspectives. But, it's not that we shouldn't be cautious about anything. I think we should be cautious. It was an emergency approval, FDA approval. And as probably the FDA did approve Pfizer after you give, how many times do you have a research group that has, more than 1 billion people involved? I mean, so normally we approve things after 3,000 people, that type of thing. So I don't know. Did I cover that?
That was good.
Cover that? Okay.
Like I said, I'm trying to cover the vaccine questions. Is there any truth about? And I'm trying to paraphrase this one. Is there any truth to the idea that's going around on like TikTok or YouTube that the vaccine causes red blood cell damage? I don't know exactly what the.
Well, depending on what you're looking at, the virus can, of course, attach to any part of your body, and so there is hemolysis. There is a potential relationship, but that is actually short term. One, you don't want it to be. Let me give you a study here, because this might answer a few people's questions. This is who gives it and how they give it. So I want to tell you something, because there's been a lot of reverse decisions. Our people that we pay good money to tell us good information, like for instance, World Health and several others told us not to use steroids. Guess what is the most beneficial thing to save the most lives that we've had, other than learning how to manage air? Like what Eric had was high flow. Don't intubate people. You go through CPAP, BiPAP, ECMO, high flow. Leave that for the absolute last. And they did the right thing, because we know the survival rate is much higher. So that was keeping him off the vent as long as you could. However, it was painful. In most cases, humanly, we would rather just put him to sleep and let him not suffer. But we found out that is not a good thing. So we'd rather have him suffer and live than not suffer and die. So when we let's focus on that question, since I just distracted myself here.
The red blood cell damage.
The red blood cell, the red blood cell. Okay, so sorry about that. I was focused on Eric again.
No, you're good.
We're gonna beat this, Eric. So don't give up. We're gonna beat this with God's help. But anyway, what the study was, FDA goes and puts an instruction manual that you can plunge that shot in. You don't have to draw back. Why did we draw back? Why did we teach everybody to draw back? Because you don't want to inject in a vein or artery. So you look for the flash of blood. Don't inject. So if you inject in the vein, where's it going to go? Heart and lungs. Okay, everything goes back to heart and lungs. In artery, it's going to go to distal areas. So one of my patients in the nursing home got injected by one of the contractors, and her hand turned black. And she just had gotten the vaccine. I said, oh no, they injected an artery. I'd never even seen that before. In fact, none of our doctors, I don't think, had ever seen that before. So I reversed the vaccine. The nurse was smart. She recognized it. We treated it, went to the ER, observed for 8 hours just to make sure we had pulses, then went back home. She's done fine. So you don't want to inject in your artery to start with the red blood cells. And so we have a study that's in its 5th week since it was first in print. It's being peer-reviewed, which means other doctors analyze to make sure there's no mistake. And guess what they found in that? So you could assume it would also be true for the myocarditis, but they found clotting. You significantly increase your risk of clotting by injecting in an artery or a vein. So you get a venous clot or arterial clot, and which may account for the majority of our problems. So you want all of the reaction to take place here. You don't want it to take place here, right? But yeah, there is possibility, but it's going to be limited to the length of time of your immune system reaction. Remember, these proteins are going to be destroyed by phagocytosis. It is not going to be a long-term thing by anything that we know today.
The most liked question that someone posted that has nothing to do with vaccine has something to do, I guess, with what happened with Eric and even Pastor Dwayne. It says, if early treatment is the way to prevent severe diseases, why did he just give you a positive result and then just send you on your way like they did with him? With no, like, here's some Tylenol. Why is that more common than not, it seems like?
Well, it is definitely more common, and please do not blame your doctor for not treating you, because most doctors are waiting for FDA and CDC to tell us. They did no focus on early treatment at all. The rest of the world is, because they can't afford high flow. Italy, I was on a conference with one of the head ICU coordinators for Italy. I don't remember back from there. I don't know if you know this, but Wuhan actually owns and operates all of the clothing manufacturing in northern Italy. So it came directly from Wuhan to northern Italy. So wow. if you didn't know that association. But anyway, they could not afford high flow. And there's one of the articles I sent you told about how all of our suppliers of oxygen were running out of oxygen. And they're freezing up because it's 70 liters a minute, a huge amount. And in the beginning, we were afraid of it because we thought it was going to spread outside the parameters of our negative air rooms in our ICU, which basically they draft everything out so things don't leak to the next patient. But it was so much volume, we were worried, everybody was afraid of doing high flow. But out in California, I was visiting with some of the doctors down in the San Diego area. Were doing a huge success rate. So all of a sudden, that 80% death rate was dropping way down, and so we saw that. So, but anyway, the let's see, what was it? What was the?
It was like, why are people being sent home? If early treatment's the answer, why are people being sent home with nothing?
Okay. Yeah, now that has to do with our government. So, and I can't. Everybody's not going to be a research science. I was programmed in science. That was all my background was science. Maybe I'm dumb in everything else, but I know a little bit about science. But so we actually have doctors that are researching that here based on research of other countries. And there's numerous medicines. I don't know if you remember what President Trump got. Yeah, he was on vitamin D and zinc already. He got laughed out from being on hydroxychloroquine, which, by the way, was hydroxychloroquine effective? Now, our researchers went and studied it in the end-stage disease, and there's no viral replication. It was an antiviral. Then we had almost all the other studies were trying to find something cheap to use at the beginning of disease where the virus is replicating. That's what antiviral is for. That's why remdesivir didn't work for saving lives with advanced disease. It doesn't work when there's no virus if you're an antiviral. Ding, ding. So it makes me either think our researchers could not be that foolish. There had to be some other reason they were studying backwards, or there's just too much available money that they could study anything as crazy as it is. There's somebody's going to be reviewing. So what it is right at this point is that we've got a few thousand doctors in the country. I'm one of them. One of the ones that I've tried to help in the research, it's called Frontline Critical Care Coalition. And we've got a couple of the others. Remember, do not criticize your doctor because there's no known proven cure, CDC, FDA approval, on anything. And in fact, you'll be shocked to know that when you go to the hospital, there's limited amounts of treatment. We bet, the steroids and the oxygen, how we do oxygen, those are the two biggest survival things that we've done. So, but that is why, because our government has not made any statement. Now, if you want to look at India gave everybody ivermectin and doxycycline home kits. And look at their death rate. It's lower than ours, and they had the pandemic with hardly any vaccine. So, we don't have a real valuable study to look at. Now, we've done some dumb things in our country because now we got everybody that's raising a cow or horse. We actually have people take super amounts. We actually had some poisonings that take place. Do not be taking this stuff in veterinary quantities. Let somebody that knows and experienced. Now, I was experienced with this overseas, but in our country, doctors had not used ivermectin. Just like hydroxychloroquine, very few doctors in our country have ever written for either one of those. Now, I'm a strange bird because I've spent my time overseas, in missions, so it's a different thing. Ivermectin actually won a Nobel Prize for saving most lives in the year back in 2015. And it's an old drug, it's been around for in the 40-year range. But that's why nothing's approved. There's zero that's approved as effective treatment.
So there's no universal, this is what you should take on
No,
early
there isn't. However, I will tell you what I'm trying. I mean, I can share that sometime with you. And I recommend all my patients, if they aren't, it's because they refuse to, but vitamin D and zinc, I want them to stay on it, not super normal amounts. You've heard me say that.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
So we have
More
another
than once.
question. If you're fully vaccinated, and you have been maybe for months or so, should you be concerned about going out to eat or shopping or going into places now that the Delta variant is hit, or should you pull yourself back and be a little more reserved going out now that it's even if you're vaccinated?
Yeah, yes, I would still be very careful about that social distancing. Remember how quickly this spreads. Now, the death rate is pretty low, relatively, and you take a look at your age group, a 40-year-old vaccinated versus an 80-year-old, I wouldn't intensely expose my grandma going out every night of the week to some real busy street. And I would try to go to places that practice social distancing if I went. So yes, I would go move backwards prior to where our government made a pitch. Remember they were loosening up the guidelines. Well, the CDC reversed their decision on masks with people because they found out, guess what? You can spread this thing. It's very often asymptomatic with vaccinated people. Like one of our towns that we recently discovered, 400 people got, with just, they think one big mass gathering.
Talking about masks, there was a question about masks. It says, and I know you've addressed this is the third time you've been here. Why wear masks if they're not completely preventing? You've answered this before, but I want you to answer it again, maybe for someone that hasn't said anything.
Well, there's a couple of things. It depends on what you're wearing. Some people wear a piece of cloth. Now, in the hospital, nobody in our clinic has contracted COVID inside the clinic if they're following the rules.
Okay.
And now, normally, we're going to have this plus a shield. Now, our main concern, I'm concerned about myself too, but my main concern is my 80, 90-year-old patients. So in our clinic, it's only well checks. If somebody's sick, I'm seeing them in the car. Isn't that right? And so the reason is until I know that they're not infectious. Now, if I'm wearing a mask, if I'm wearing a single piece of cloth, and if we want to put that live demonstration, it actually shows coughing and sneezing through different types of masks, how far it spreads, 10, 12 feet.
Yeah.
And I've got that.
I've seen that, yeah.
And I've got that in that list that I sent to you. So we can show that if people wants to see the effects of masks and different types of masks. Now an N95 or a K95, this one's a K95, not quite as tightly fit, but much more comfortable. They have several layers, and many of them are actually impregnated with a zinc compound, which is antiviral also. I recycle mine, but I don't rebreathe the same thing without sterilizing. So every day I hang mine up on this hanger, and when I get to 3, I sterilize them, and I use peroxide because some of the other things will destroy the coating that's on many of the N95s in there. And so it depends on what kind of mask. Now, the tighter the mask is, there's 2 aspects of infection. One of those is related to viral load, how much you are breathing in. So if you have a leaky mask, say just a loose-fitting surgical mask, coming around the edges, and that type, very limited amount through here. Now, the fabric that you use is important. Multi-layer fabrics. Now, remember Fauci said, wear 3 masks. Start 1, 2, and 3. No, yeah, that's a little bit cumbersome. But you don't want to wear a knitted
crocheted mask.
Crochet mask with much help. That's not going to filter out the virus. And so there is 2 things. One is protecting those around you from sneezing and coughing. So even the single layer cloth will help some, but if you look at that thing, you'll see there's a scape that's going to go out 18 inches or so, even the cloth. And then the other part is viral load, how much you can breathe in that might come around the leakage of your mask. And so So those are the protection points of a mask, and how we use it and the training. We became pretty loose in the definition of what is a legal mask. And I hate to say this, but part of it was to protect healthcare workers because we couldn't get masks.
Yeah, they just let everybody wear whatever.
Yeah, and because if they said everybody has to wear a K95, N95, guess what? There's no K95s for the healthcare worker that's at the highest risk. So it was really selfish on our part that we.
Well,
we're
glad.
That, we've had that because, like I said, I've tried to organize them in the best way possible. And I guess this was a really good question I thought of. We're a little over a year into this. Why are we still getting like false positives, false negatives for tests and things of that nature? Why is that still being an issue where someone can go and be like, oh, you're negative, and then 2 days later they're like super sick? Are they going too early, too late? Why are we still having these issues?
Well,
with tests?
it can be a false negative.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, and please don't criticize any other provider that does things different, because it's all a learning process. Mm-hmm. But I always look at the false positive, false negative rate. We in other terms that you'll see is sensitivity, your ability to pick up. If you can only pick up 95%, it's 95% sensitivity. However, if you mislabel some, you say they've got COVID and they don't have, that's called specificity. Right. So there's percentages now. Now we've got it. In fact, our clinic is looking at a test right now that's very close to 100% specific and in the neighborhood of 99.7% sensitive at picking. So now if you look at our first tests, the antigen test, we can miss just under 40%. It had a 5% false positive, but its miss rate, that's what we call a false negative, is miss rate. So I never ever trusted the antigen mask. So what I did was I always did 2 samples, and if that was negative and I was suspicious at all, then I did the PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction, which is quite a bit more sensitive. And now the newer versions of the PCR test, which is the genetic amplification study, it's kind of like how in criminal defense they can go and look at a single cell and amplify it where they can read your whole DNA out of just 1 cell or 2 cells. And so we are getting better. Remember, in the beginning, guess who was supposed to design the vaccine? CDC. Guess who was supposed to design testing? Because the CDC. Guess who failed on all of the above? The CDC. After we spent billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So
well, that's where a lot of the mistrust is coming from. Is the misinformation, but also the mishandling of
mishandling. So we've been spending billions of dollars for our federal organizations that failed to protect us. So you remember what President Trump does is, that's it, I'm done with you guys. So he released it to the top minds and companies of the country. And so within 30 days, even though CDC had been working on it much before that, they came out with 70 tests. So I think if you let the minds of the imaginative Americans go and some of our science power, it's better than having somebody that's sitting waiting for their retirement coming, you know. So
it's just that we're getting better. There's still going to be issues, but
we're getting way better, way better. I'm about ready to push it. There's cost in getting all these little gadgets, you know. That one you got to order all sorts of tests, and there's no money to be made by doing these tests. And so you can give yourself a financial jeopardy a little bit if you get too. So I mean, we have to balance the cost of things. Plus, but I always want the best for my patient, but I don't want the clinic to go bankrupt either in the process. But so it's changing dramatically. So
that was the majority of them.
Okay, I have. We're going to go ahead and kind of pull it together, but I do want to ask one question or just one discussion. The church really has suffered a lot through the COVID virus because our faith requires us to gather in masses. It requires us to sing together. I say require, but that's how we do. We sing together. We shake hands. We greet one another with a holy kiss. You know, we hug. Yeah.
Kiss of death. I think. I see those guys over there.
We shake hands. Okay. Our version is shaking hands or high-fiving or whatever. But to be completely safe, it takes the heart out of our worship.
It does.
Singing.
It does.
Even singing, you know, and maybe really revival preaching when you're too close to the people, you know. How can we continue to not abandon our faith practices and still be relatively safe?
Yeah, and of course, ideally, if all your congregation was vaccinated, that would cut your risk way down. You're elderly, but like,
And I think I'll say this, most of our elderly people have been vaccinated.
yeah, the majority of them, and nationwide we're at about the 88%
Yeah,
range.
so that's a real high rate. And
I hate to see an older person come in today that dies, because they're spattering some of our statistics, but thankfully it was just, we lost 21 in 2 weeks, just one nursing home and one ward, 50% mortality rate in some of these high-risk patients, hospice and cancer patients.
The place my brother-in-law just passed away, where he got it, there was a church, had a funeral.
Oh, yeah.
It was a small church. They packed it with a lot of people in there.
Well,
and there was, I understand there was 5 pastors that preached, and it went over 2 hours. And to begin with, about 15 people ended up with COVID, and then out of those, other people ended up getting it, including my brother-in-law who died from it, my sister who got very sick from it, the pastor's wife who already had cancer and was compromised, and she died from it. And we don't know how many others. So we've got, we can't stop practicing our faith, but we've got to be wise.
We do, and we've got 2 enemies. We got the virus, the enemy, but then we got a misinformation as the enemy.
Yeah,
and that's really probably the key enemy. And I did include some church planning things in the PDF I sent to you, and there's not a lot of specifics, but one of the biggest thing that is to fight misinformation. Misinformation is the biggest problem we have in our country. We're actually way less vaccinated than the UK is. And the UK is pretty modern too, and they've got social media, but they're not as influenced as we are. They're imitating us. They're going to be there, but I hope they don't imitate us. But so we got to be careful where we get our sources from. And I think, you'll see in that guidelines, it talks about churches making sure that they vet misinformation that the people have that present to them. And so when we look at things I think I've shared with you, drift, we know that coughing, sneezing, or singing, it's not 6 feet anymore. If you're unmasked at that point, you could spread it quite a bit further, 12 feet. So you got to be careful about anybody with risk. I would always say the elderly towards the back and towards the sides, away from speaking, especially without mask. It's really hard to speak with a mask on. They do have masks, just like you have diving equipment that has mics. We've actually had pastors try that. I'm not saying you need to, but yeah, I think it takes some planning. Now we know outdoor activity is way safer.
Yeah.
2 of our funeral homes, and I think that every one of our funeral homes need to take recognition of this because of just what happened. Because that's not the only funeral that's caused that. We've had several here that have generated all sorts of cases.
Yeah.
And they happen to be usually more attended in the smaller churches that they're held in than what the church normally holds. And so they're more packed out. And then they're longer. So there's a couple of things. Viral load in the air, so ventilation, closed space, outdoors, those huge difference. Outdoors significantly reduced. So if you can do bigger gatherings where they're closer like that, where you just have masses, outdoors. It's kind of hard in the winter months to do that. But the other one is the length of time of exposure. So when we consider a high-risk exposure as being in the same room, even if it's a 20 by 20 room and you're more than 6 feet away, if you're in that more than 10 minutes, that's a high-risk exposure with a COVID patient. So ventilation is really important, but I think it really takes the minds of the board and the input of the people to make it safe, and they've got to be willing to accept instruction. What I hate is pastors being ridiculed for trying to do the right thing. People won't go to the church if they wear a mask. They won't go to the church if they don't wear a mask. So, what in the world kind of a Christian world are we living in? We don't respect authority at all. But the one thing is find the real science. Don't be looking at Facebook and somebody that's making $150,000 like some of these have by saying something that's totally false. We got to find the science. So that's part of the vetting that we need to do. And pastors do not need to be suffering. I bet you, probably you and every pastor in the country, I'm sure. I know they wouldn't have left you out, even as good as our people are. You have to tell me.
We've heard both sides.
We've been
both
criticized.
sides.
We've been criticized both ways, and we understand that. I get that, and you know, I'll just say, and I've told others before. I don't like the government mandating.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm totally
I'm 100%
against
for
the
you.
government mandating how we can
Totally.
worship or those kind of things.
Got
But
2 thumbs up on that.
two thumbs up on that. But I do encourage people to use good common sense.
It is. And if you don't know the science, let somebody help you know the science or understand. You know, if you do it by playing cowboy, shooting from the hips without ever aiming, you know, somebody's going to get hurt. And
Right.
And
Right.
so I think that's what the Wheaton College, you know, method was, is to not just have random opinions, because that's what is operating our news media today.
Yeah.
It's random opinions.
Yeah, yeah.
And how do our poor kids even know where facts are? Yeah.
And I'm pretty proud of our church through this whole thing. Outside of that one event that took place off our campus in another place with a group of people, from our church, I don't know of a single person that picked up COVID from another person.
And I don't know that from within the church either. I think the church has generally done great. And
I mean, we have. I want people to know that, you know, we have been very safe. We've done It was very unfortunate with that group a while back where Pastor Dwayne picked it up, but that was not on our campus or within our church. You know,
that's right.
working the way it happens there normally.
That's
We have.
well, I think you've done real well.
We've adapted some because, you know, the whole world has opened up a lot, and so right now, you know, we're just trying to use the best wisdom we can to keep everybody safe. But again, if everybody would do the right thing to keep themselves safe,
It would help protect everybody else, too.
everybody else is protected. So it's up to us, each of us, to do our part. I don't, you know, again, I don't want to mandate people, but I would say, please, everybody, don't just do it for yourself, but do it for somebody else. Do it for others.
And really, that's what Jesus would want. I mean, what did
Yeah.
he say? You know, first commandment, we curse no, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, might, and strength. But second one is love your neighbor as yourself. And so that should be the first thought in your mind is our 80-year-old sisters over there that are afraid to come to church. We've got to make it safe for them.
Yeah.
And some of them aren't vaccinated. A few of them aren't vaccinated. And I particularly pray for them. I don't know why they're not, but you know, the other thing is whatever we can do to prevent, and maybe we'll come up with early treatment that will actually be proven in the minds of every doctor. I hope that'll happen someday. In my mind, it seems to be helping, but it's hard to judge anything when you're in the middle of doing something, you know.
Yeah.
And so every doctor that was given remdesivir thought it was saving lives, and it's not.
Yeah.
So you know, and I mentioned that to say is if you think the hospital's always going to save you, we don't have much to save you on this, folks. That's been proven. And so, you know, we've got to use wisdom, and God, you know, wants us to pray for discernment. And when you tell somebody, God told me not to do something, or just say, make sure it was really God that was speaking. Yeah.
So. Yeah, and I got my vaccine after I had COVID, and so I felt like I had natural immunity. but I got the other vaccines for 2 reasons. One is because you told me to. You encouraged me to. But the other was, it wasn't because I was afraid I'd get COVID. I wanted to make sure that I would never be the one that would pass it on to someone else. I just wouldn't want to do that. So I was being altruistic, I guess, in doing that, not to protect myself, but to protect everybody else. And I think if we will live for others,
certainly lowers the chances of that, even though we know there's some transmission, silent transmission, that has become apparent to us over time. But it's certainly not at the same extent of another COVID patient.
So we need to live for others. Well, anything else need to be said? We've gone way over, but it's very.
Everyone's saying thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Watts,
People
for
are
answering
sticking
a lot
with
of these questions.
You're welcome.
Like I said, there was a lot that was, I won't say repetitive, but it was a lot of them that was the same kind of geared stuff. So they want to thank you for that, and from Facebook and YouTube. So thank y'all for that, and we're clear on our side if y'all just want to wrap it up.
Okay, well, thank all of you for watching, and this is going to be where people can upload it later on and watch it. So please share it. It'll be fine. We thank you for doing that, helping us to help others in this. And Dr. Watts, thank you so much for sharing today. Eric, thank you for coming and being with us. Our prayers are with you and with all the others that have had part of their life taken away from them. We just pray that God will give you complete restoration and restore your family for all they've lost because of your disease as well. So Lord, we do thank you that you gave your life, you gave it all to us so that we could have life and have it more abundantly. And we're blessed to know you tonight. And God, I just pray that you'll help us to be harmless as doves, but wise as serpents as we live in this difficult time. And help us to do all that we do to be a blessing to others, to do no harm, but to encourage each other, to strengthen each other, and to make sure that we all keep our focus on you, because in the end, it's all about you, Lord. In the end, it's all about you being glorified. So we glorify you and praise you today in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for being